Welcome to this week's asynchronous course content. This week, we are going to be doing an introduction to systematic instruction for students with complex support needs. And I have to tell you, this is the magic. This is the magic for our population. These are the evidence-based practices we're going to be learning about that, again, lay the foundation for the instructional strategies that you'll use in your classroom. So here we go. So we want to make sure that when we are monitoring our students, that we are getting the most out of our data, that we want to use that data to then improve our program and improve our students' learning. But what that all comes back to is our teaching. And so when I think about teaching, I think about a quote from Dr. Robert Pennington, and he says that teaching can be said to have occurred when students' behavior changes in response to the application of instruction. So what does that mean? That means that when you teach and then your students walk away being able to do something, or they know something that they weren't able to do or didn't know before you provided that instruction, that's how you know that you have really taught them. And so oftentimes people think about teaching as delivery of instruction, but teaching really is more than just that act. It also includes the outcomes, right? It's not just what you do, but it's how your instruction impacts students' learning and what those outcomes are. So when you're thinking about teaching, again, make sure that you're not only thinking about your instruction, but you're thinking about the outcomes of your students. And so what I want you to do right now, this will be the number one, the first response that you'll have in your video participation document that you turn into class. And let me say, the last question on every single document should be questions that you have about the week's content. Because what I'm going to do is, after you turn it in at 11:30, is I'm going to sit down on Canvas and I'm going to go through all your questions. And then that is going to help inform what we do in class at the beginning of class. And then the rest of the class will be an application and working and applying what you're learning this week. So again, what I want you to do now is, for number one, I want you to write the question, how do you know if you're teaching then? And then I want you to respond, how do you know if you're teaching? And then when you're finished, come on back. So stop the video now, and then I'll see you in just a second. All right, welcome back. So when I think about how I know I'm teaching, is one of the things I make sure that I'm looking at is my progress monitoring data, right? That's how I know I'm teaching, is through progress monitoring. And so we need to make sure, you and I need to make sure that we are continuously conducting assessments and that we're collecting data, that we're doing it continuously, we're doing it consistently, and we know we're doing it consistently because we have a predetermined schedule that we do before we ever start that instruction. So we know at what intervals we're going to assess our student. We're going to progress monitor them. And then, as you know, we use that data to make those data-based instructional decisions. And also, we're going to use that data to tell us if what we're doing, if our instruction, is it working? Is it not working and I need to modify or change it? Or has it already worked and my student has mastered this skill according to the criteria and their IP goal, or that you've set for them for mastery? And do I now need to move on? So that's how I know that I'm teaching, is through that progress monitoring. And so one of the things I've always told my student teachers, and you're about to go into student teaching before long, so I want to share this with you, is that anyone, doesn't matter who it is, SLP, principal, parent, should be able to walk in, pick up your data notebook. Don't let a parent pick it up unless it's only related to their child. And they are able to determine what your student is able to currently do, what is their present level of performance, and how are they progressing towards whatever that goal or objective are. And so one of the things I want to encourage you as a teacher is to make sure that you are getting the best use you can, and that you are training your paraprofessionals, because they really are the unsung heroes in special education. They're supporting you reaching your potential and your goals, the same with students. And so we want to do the same with our paras, because when we train them, their job is easier and they have better outcomes, just like you when you are using evidence-based practices or research-based practices as well. So teach your paraprofessionals how to collect and analyze data, because you want them to know, number one, they need to be able to look at those IEPs or at least have those goals on your data sheet so they can say, hey, now John has reached 80% across 3 consecutive sessions. Hey, Ty, he's reached mastery here. Where do we go next? Because what if you have open house or you have parent-teacher conferences that day? Or what if you're really busy and you need to get home because you got to take your children somewhere and you're not able to look at it until Monday, and that's 3 days down the road? You want to make sure, again, that they are trained to do that. And these are easy skills to teach your paraprofessionals. I'm saying as someone who did it. All right, so we're going to talk about data collection now and assessment. So this should be a review. I do want to say up front that this is not on the quiz, okay? So you do have a quiz on systematic instruction. This is not it, because it should be a review. And I also want to provide this to you as a resource. So these slides, this information are on the Canvas website. I would keep that. That's something worth keeping. So let's talk about free operant assessment. So that's when the response you're looking for, the behavior, has a clear beginning and an end, and it's occurring in a natural environment. So you would be measuring things like count and rate. So it might be that a teacher is using their smartphone, they got an app, and they're using that to record the number of times that a student is correctly answering why questions, for example. Or a teacher might record, using a data sheet, the number of requests for assistance within 45 minutes, and they want to calculate the rate per minute, because this student is asking questions within a 45-minute period. They are asking 127 questions, because they know when they ask questions, they get help, and then they get the answer, or someone gets frustrated and they get out of the work, for example. So here is an example of a data sheet. So what I want you to make sure that we're doing, and we're going to analyze it together, or I'm going to analyze it for you in just a second, is that with this skill, the student is asking questions that are directed at the peers. They may be off topic, and they are asking these questions that are really high rate. So what we want to make sure that we're doing is decreasing those behaviors. So when I look at the number of occurrences, the way that I'm going to find the rate is I'm going to first calculate the number of minutes that were within the observation period. And then I'm going to take the total number of occurrences and divide the number of minutes by that. And so what I end up getting when I'm analyzing this data is that on August 31st, he was asking one question every 25 minutes. The next day, it decreased to one question every 23 minutes. And our intervention is going great, because on the 2nd, the student asked one question every 10 minutes. So what I want you to do now is I want you to look at that data and tell me, what kind of a database decision would you make? What would be your next step with the students? Now, I want to give you a heads up that we are going to discuss this. You're going to discuss this with the peer, your response, your database decision with the peer when we're in class, okay? So go ahead and stop the video, write number 2, and you can just put my database decision is, and then come back when you're done. All right, we're going to discuss that in class, so I look forward to hearing your response. All right, next one, trial-based assessment. Well, with this, it's a discrete skill. So remember, that's a skill that we just have one response, and we don't have different steps to it. So it's a discrete skill or a discrete response, and it's after you give a cue or some kind of an event. So it might be that I put out 2 blocks, and what I want the student to do is to say 2, because they're counting, they're telling me how many. Or we have just done a story-based lesson, which you're going to learn about in a few weeks, and I ask the student who is the main character, and they're able to tell me that. So with this trial-based assessment, we are measuring the percentage or the rate of the behavior, the percentage correct. So a teacher might calculate the number of correct responses in a story-based lesson related to comprehension of that story-based lesson. Or they might record the number of math problems a student can complete in a minute. For example, we're doing simple addition. How many simple addition problems can you complete in a minute? And we're looking at fluency with that. So let's look at what that day might look like. So as you can see with this trial-based assessment, for each day there were 5 different trials, and we can see that on day 1 the student got 60%, then 60% on day 2, day 3 80%, day 4 on 80%. Now I want you to look at those percentages, and I want you to tell me, if you were a parent, for example, because you'll have to cover this data when you have a parent-teacher conference, for example, or if a parent asks for the data, we want to make sure we can explain it to it. which would make it easier for you to see progress over time? Would it be to have 3 out of 5 instead, or would it be to use that percentage of 60%? So go ahead and answer that for number 3. And let me show you the next one, because would only have to stop the video once, and then look at the data and make your database decision for number 4. Stop the video, come back, and we'll move to our next type of assessment data collection. All right, this one should be very familiar to you as a task analytic assessment. Obviously, this is when we are doing some kind of a chain skill, a skill that has multiple steps, something like setting the table or putting on your code. And we have different types of measurements. So it might be a single opportunity. Sounds just what it is. They get one opportunity, or they might have multiple opportunities. And so maybe a teacher is collecting data on how many steps a student can complete independently when they're learning to cook something brand new, and the teacher is going to collect data until the student cannot perform a task, or a step in the task. So once they are not able to perform the task, when we're doing that simple opportunity, you're going to stop the assessment. I know you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, but once we hit 5, that's where you're stuck and I need to focus my instruction. Or maybe a paraprofessional is collecting data on a student's ability to write a sentence, and when the student makes an error, the teacher is going to provide error correction, such as writing the word, and then she's going to wait on the student to move to the next step in the skill. So that'd be a multiple opportunity. So here again is an example of data that is a task analytic assessment. You can see on the left the steps to the task, which would be texting someone. That's what this skill is. And then you can see the data. So what I want you to do is to analyze that data, share your thoughts for number 5, share your database decision. Stop your video, write number 5, and my database decision is, and then come back and we'll keep moving. All right, let's look at the next one. Permanent product. This is easy. I know when I was young, this was one of the ways that we were assessed quite often. And so that's when you actually produce something that's a permanent product. It could be a project, it could be a model, it could be a video, it could be a worksheet. And so when you're using those permanent products, you might look at the percentage correct, or the percentage of components included, number here. You might have something like a rubric where you're rating it. So a teacher might count the number of words correctly matched to their definition. Or you might have a student who is learning to use a stamp to sign their name. And we have it broken down by points. So example, for 4 points, they get 4 points if the name is neat, legible, and complete. The whole signature can be seen. They get 3 points if the name is still legible, but it's slightly smeared or faint, for example. And that goes all the way down to 0 if the name is not legible. And so here is an example. This is number 6 for you. Here is an example of a permanent product in writing. And so in the first one, the student was directed to write a sentence about what they were studying. And they should have, the sentence should have said, I'm studying about poetry. And then at the end of the lesson, they were supposed to write a sentence about what they learned. And the sentence they wrote should have been, I learned about poetry. And you can see here what their permanent product's done. So for number 6, I want you to write, how would you score these permanent products? Again, remember to include the question, because I will not have the PowerPoint open, and it helps me with my grading, and I do some informal assessments by looking through your responses each week. So go ahead and stop. How would you score these permanent products? And then come back. All right, I'm going to give you a hint in case you struggled with that one. This is the scoring sheet that was used for assessing these sentences. So this comes out of some of my research. So these were really written by students. And so as with the other ones, I want you to tell me, look at the data that you just collected, because let's say this is our baseline and this is our first data point that we're collecting on our students. What kind of database decision would you make based on just that one data point, understanding it's only one? All right, I'll see you in a second. All right. The next one is timing, and that is exactly what it sounds like, because there are behaviors that vary in length of time, like how long a student might be able to sit and attend to an activity, instructional activity, or they don't occur quickly enough following the cue. So I give you a task direction, and then you don't immediately do what I say, so it could take a while. And so what those are really called is when we're looking at the length of time, that's called duration. And when we're looking at how quickly a behavior occurs after a task direction, a cue, et cetera, that is called latency. So we might measure the total duration. How long did it take you all in the whole skill, for example, or the whole amount of time that for a response interval, for example, or the duration of the occurrence, or latency recording. And latency recording, again, is how long it took you to initiate, to start the behavior after you were given a task direction, for example. So examples could be that the teachers are recording the amount of time the child plays in close proximity to a student. So we're not looking at them playing together, we're just looking at them getting closer to it. For example, a student with autism, perhaps. They might record the length of a student's refusals to determine if they are decreasing over time. So a student is refusing and he is refusing for 10 minutes. We want to see, does that decrease to 9 minutes, for example? That's a win. Or the teacher is recording the amount of time it takes for a student to start working once they enter the job site. So that would be the latency. You walk in, how long from the minute you walk in the door of your job does it take you to start working? And so you don't have to do any database decisions at all, but what I do want you to do is I want you to stop and I want you to look at each of these data sheets, because it'll give you a good idea of what duration recording looks like and what latency recording looks like. So I want you to stop now and just take maybe a minute per, and look at the activity, look at the time it began, the time it ended, and so that you have a clear understanding of what one of those data sheets might look like, and then come on back. All right. The next one is time sampling, and you should know this from those of you who at least are here on campus and have done your SPED 50/40 course, because you did do some momentary time sampling. And that's when we're looking for behaviors that occur continuously or they occur too frequently to measure. They're happening so fast, it's difficult for us to measure. And so one of the types is called whole interval recording, and that's when the teacher divides a 30-minute period, for example, by 1-minute intervals. And so we've got 31-minute intervals, and you're going to record whether that student was on task for the whole interval, the entire interval. Then we have partial interval recording, and that's when you do the same thing, divide 30 minutes by 1-minute intervals. So we've got 30 intervals, and we're going to record whether the student picks his fingernails at any point during the interval. Doesn't matter when it is, doesn't have to happen the whole time, just any time. And then the last one is that momentary time sampling, same 31-minute intervals, and you're recording where the student is in his seat at the end of the interval. So you might just look momentarily at the beginning of the interval, were they in their seat, then you look away, or it might be at the end. I usually do it at the beginning of the interval. All right, let's do this. Just give you a heads up. In class, we are going to be doing the data sheet, and you're going to be looking at some interval recording that I did for a research study, and you are going to analyze that. All right, so things we want to think about related to data collection. Make sure that your data is accurate, because if it is not, it is harmful to your instructional decisions. You will not make accurate instructional decisions if your data is not accurate. Not only that, you will not know your students' true performance because your data is not accurate. There are some concerns with a measurement. There are measurement concerns because your data can be misleading, because it can have misleading data patterns. For example, if you only collect data on Friday, you only collect data after lunch, you only collect data before recess. Those are rough times for students, right? Their bodies are in different places than you might want them to be for an assessment. So make sure that you are carefully selecting your data methods and those schedules on which you're going to do them, because accuracy matters. Not only that, there's something called overdrift that you have to really be concerned about and be aware of, because as you are scoring, you can gradually kind of start to move away from whatever that target behavior and the definition, because remember, we're always going to operationally define our behavior. So we know exactly what it looks like. Everybody knows exactly what it looks like. Suddenly, what happens with observer drift is you start to accept like approximations. Well, we said that if he stood up and his bottom was off the seat, then that was out of seat behavior, but he only stood up for a second, so I'm not going to count that one. You'll start to kind of move away. So you want to make sure you train your staff again in collecting data, and one of the best ways to do that is model it first, rehearse it with them, have them then practice it, and then you give them feedback, okay? And you want to make sure that you're regularly checking the fidelity of their implementation. Are they implementing the instructional strategy in the way it's supposed to be implemented? One way that you can check your data to make sure you're both on the same team is something called inter-observer agreement. And that's where you have two people collect data on the same behavior, and then you're going to compare that data to see what your agreement is. And I always would ask people, like, my speech therapist, can you come sit in? Can my principal come sit in and collect data at the same time I do? All right. As I said before, this is stuff you need to know, but whoop, whoop, it is not on the quiz. Again, this information is on Canvas, and I encourage you to download it and keep it. If you have any questions, please make sure the last response on every single video participation should be your questions. I invite questions. If you have them, please ask them, because if you have to have them, other people probably do too, or I just need to make sure I clarify something, and so I welcome them. All right, I'll see you in the next video, everybody.